Besides the neutral expression that she wore when she was alone, Mrs. Freeman had two others, forged and reverse, that she used with all her human dealings. Her forward expression was steady and driving like the advance of a truck. Her eyes never swerved left or right, but they turned as the story turned, as if they followed a yellow line down the center of it. She seldom used the other expression because it was not often necessary for her to retract a statement. But when she did, her face came to a complete stop. There was an almost imperceptible movement of her black eyes, during which they seemed to be receding. And then the observer would see that Mrs. Freeman, though she might stand there as real as several grain sacks thrown on top of each other, was no longer there in spirit. As for getting anything across to her when this was the case, Mrs. Hopewell had given up. She might as well talk her head off. Mrs. Freeman could never be brought to admit herself wrong at any point. She would stand there, and if she could be brought to say anything, it was something like, "Well, I wouldn't have said it was, and I wouldn't have said it wasn't." Or, letting her gaze range over the top kitchen shelf where she could see an assortment of dusty bottles, she might remark, "I see you ain't had many of them figs you put up last summer." They carried on with their most important business in the kitchen at breakfast. Every morning, Miss Hopewell got up at 7 o'clock and lit her gas heater, and Joy was her daughter, a large blonde girl who had an artificial leg. Mrs. Hopewell thought of her as a child, although she was 32 years old and highly educated. Joy would get up while her mother was eating and lumber into the bathroom and slam the door, and before long Mrs. Freeman would arrive at the back door. Joy would hear her mother call, "Come on in," and they would talk for a while in low voices that were indistinguishable in the bathroom. By the time Joy came in, they had usually finished the weather report and were on one or another of Mrs. Freeman's daughters, Glynice or Cara May. Joy called Glycerin and Caramel. Glynice, a redhead, was 18 and had many admirers. Cara May, a blonde girl, was only 15, but she was already married and pregnant. She could not keep anything on her stomach. Every morning, Mrs. Freeman told Mrs. Hopewell how many times she had vomited since the last report. Mrs. Hopewell liked to tell people that Glynice and Cara May were two of the finest girls that she knew, and that Mrs. Freeman was a lady, and that she was never ashamed to take her anywhere or introduce her to anybody they might meet. Then she would tell how she happened to hire the Freemans in the first place, and how they were a godsend to her, and how she had had them for 4 years. The reason for her keeping them so long was that they were not trash. They were good country people. She had telephoned the man whose name they had given as a reference, and he told her that Mr. Freeman was a good farmer, but that his wife was the nosiest woman ever to walk this earth. "She got to be in everything," the man said. "If she don't get there before that dust settles, you can bet she's dead, that's all. She'll want to know all your business. I can stand him real good," he had said. "But me nor my wife neither could have stood that woman one more minute in this place." That put Mrs. Hopewell off for a few days. She had hired them in the end because there was no other applicants, but she made up her mind beforehand exactly how she would handle the woman. Since she was the type who had to be in everything, then Mrs. Hopewell had decided that she would not only let her be into everything, but she would see to it that she was into everything. She would give her the responsibility of everything. She'd put her in charge. Mrs. Hopewell had no bad qualities of her own, but she was able to use other people's in such a constructive way, and she was able to keep them for years. Nothing's perfect. This was one of Mrs. Hopewell's favorite sayings. Another was, well, that's life. And still another, the most important, was, well, other people have their opinions too. She would make these statements, usually at the table, in a tone of a gentle insistence, as if no one held them but her. And the large, hulking joy, whose constant outrage had obliterated every expression from her face, would just stare a little to the side of her eyes icy blue with the look of someone who had achieved blindness by an act of will and the means to keep it. When Mrs. Hopewell said to Mrs. Freeman that life was like that, Mrs. Freeman would say, I always said so myself. Nothing had been arrived at by anyone that had not first been arrived at by her. She was quicker than Mr. Freeman. When Mrs. Hopewell said to her after they had been on the place for a while, you know you're the wheel behind the wheel, and winked, Mrs. Freeman said, I know it. I've always been quick. It's some that's quicker than others. Everybody's different, Mrs. Hopewell said. Yes, most people is, Mrs. Freeman said. It takes all kinds to make the world. I always did say it myself. The girl was used to this kind of dialogue for breakfast and more of it for dinner. Sometimes they had it before supper, too. And when they had no guests, they ate in the kitchen because that was easier. Mrs. Freeman always managed to arrive at some point during the meal and to watch them finish it. She would stand in the doorway if it were summer, but in the winter she would stand with one elbow on top of the refrigerator and look down at him. Or she would stand by the gas heater, lifting the back of her skirt slightly. Occasionally, she would stand against the wall and roll her head from side to side. At no time was she in any hurry to leave. All this was very trying on Mrs. Hopewell, but she was a woman of great patience, and she realized that nothing's perfect, and that in the Freemans, she had good country people. And that if in this day and age you get good country people, you'd better hang on to them. She had plenty of experience with trash. Before the Freeman, she had averaged one tenant family a year. The wives of the farmers were not the kind you'd want to be around for very long. Mrs. Hopewell, who had divorced her husband long ago, needed someone to walk over the field with her. And when Joy had to be impressed for these services, her remarks were usually so ugly and her face so glum that Mrs. Hopewell would say, If you can't come pleasantly, I don't want you at all. To which the girl, standing square and rigid shoulders with her neck thrust slightly forward, would reply, If you want me, here I am, like I am. Mrs. Hopewell excused this attitude because of the leg. The leg had been shot off during a hunting accident when Joy was 10. It was hard for Mrs. Hopewell to realize that her child was 32 now, and that for more than 20 years she had had only one leg. She thought of her as still a child because it tore her to think that instead of the poor, stout girl in her 30s who'd never danced a step or had any normal good times, her name was not really a Joy. But as soon as she was 21 and away from home, she had it legally changed. Mrs. Hopewell was certain that she had thought and thought until she had hit upon the ugliest name in any language. Then she had gone and had the beautiful name Joy changed without telling her mother until after she had done it. Her legal name was now Olga. Mrs. Hopewell thought the name Olga, she thought of the broad blank hull of a battleship. She would not use it. She continued to call her Joy, to which the girl responded, but in a purely mechanical way. Olga had learned to tolerate Mrs. Freeman, who had saved her from taking walks with her mother. Even Glynis and Cara May were useful when they occupied attention that might otherwise have been directed at her. At first she thought she could not stand Mrs. Freeman, for she found it was not possible to be rude to her. Mrs. Freeman would take on strange resentments for days together, and she'd be sullen, but the source of her displeasure was always obscure. A direct attack, a positively or blatant ugliness to her face, these never touched her. And without warning, one day she began calling her Olga. She did not call her that in front of Mrs. Hopewell, who would have been incensed, but when she and the girl happened to be out of the house together, she would say something and then add the name Olga at the end of it. And the big, bespectacled Joy Olga would scowl and redden as if her privacy had been intruded upon. She considered her name personal affairs. She had arrived at it first on the purely on the basis of its ugly sound, and then the full genius of its fitness had struck her. She had a vision of the name working like the ugly, sweating Vulcan who stayed in the furnace, to whom, presumably, the goddess had to come when called. She saw it as the highest of her creative acts. One more of her major triumphs was that her mother had not been able to turn her dust into joy, but the greater one was that she had been able to turn it herself into Olga. However, Mrs. Freeman's relish for using the name only irritated her. It was as if Mrs. Freeman's beady, steel-pointed eyes had penetrated far enough behind her face to reach some secret fact. Something about her seemed to fascinate Mrs. Freeman, and then one day Olga realized that it was the artificial leg. Mrs. Freeman had a special fondness for details of secret infections, hidden deformities, and assaults upon children. Of diseases she preferred the lingering or the incurable. Olga had heard Mrs. Hopewell give her the details of the hunting accident, how the leg had been literally blasted off, how she had never lost consciousness. Mrs. Freeman could listen to it at any time as if it happened an hour ago. When Olga stumped into the kitchen in the morning, she could walk without making the awful noise, but she made it anyway. Mrs. Hopewell was certain, because it was ugly sounding. She glanced at them and did not speak. Mrs. Hopewell would be in her red kimono with her hair tied in a rag. She would be sitting at the table finishing her breakfast, and Mrs. Freeman would be hanging by her elbow outward from the refrigerator looking at the table. Olga always put her legs in the stove to boil and then stood over them with her arms folded. And Mrs. Hopewell would look at her, a kind of indirect gaze divided between her and Mrs. Freeman, and would think that if she would only keep herself up a little, she wouldn't be so bad looking. There was nothing wrong with her face that a pleasant expression wouldn't help. Mrs. Hopewell said that people who looked on the bright side of things would be beautiful even when they were not. Whenever she looked at Joy this way, she could not help but feel that it would have been better if the child had not taken the Ph.D. It had certainly not brought her out any, and now that she had it, there was no more excuse for her to go to school again. Mrs. Hopewell thought it was nice for girls to go to school and have a good time, but Joy had gone through. Anyhow, she would not have been strong enough to go again. The doctors had told Mrs. Hopewell that even with the best of care, Joy might only see 45. She had a weak heart. Joy made it plain that if it had not been for this condition, she would be far from these red hills and good country people. She would be in a university, lecturing people who knew what she was talking about. And Mrs. Hopewell could very well picture her there, looking like a scarecrow and lecturing to more of the same. Here she went all day in a 6-year-old skirt and a yellow sweatshirt with a faded cowboy and a horse embossed on it. She thought this was funny, but Mrs. Hopewell thought it was idiotic and showed simply that she was still a damn child. She was brilliant, but she didn't have a grain of sense. It seemed to Mrs. Hopewell that every year she grew less like other people and more like herself, bloated, rude, and squinty-eyed. And she said such strange things. To her own mother, she had said one day with no warning, and without any kind of excuse, standing up in the middle of a meal with her face purple and her mouth half full, "Woman, do you ever look inside? Do you ever look inside and see what you are not? God!" She had cried, sinking down again and staring at her plate. Malibranche was right. We are not our own light. We're not our own light. Mrs. Hopewell had no idea to this day what brought that on. She had only made the remark hoping Joy would take it in, and that a smile never hurt anyone. The girl had taken a Ph.D. in philosophy, and this left Mrs. Hopewell at a complete loss. You could say, "My daughter's a nurse," or "My daughter's a school teacher," or even, "My daughter's a chemical engineer." But you could not say, "My daughter's a philosopher." That was something that had ended with the Greeks and Romans. All day, Joy sat on her neck in a deep chair, reading. Sometimes she went for walks, but she didn't like dogs. She didn't like cats. She didn't like birds. She didn't like flowers. She didn't like nature, and she didn't like nice young men. She looked at nice young men as if she could smell their stupidity. One day, Mrs. Hopewell had picked up one of the books the girl had just put down, and she started opening it at random. She read, "Science, on the other hand, has to assert its soberness and seriousness afresh and declare that it is concerned only with what is, nothing. How can it be for science anything but a horror and a phantasm? If science is right, then one thing stands firm. Science wishes to know nothing of nothing. Such is, after all, the strictly scientific approach to nothing. We know it by wishing to know nothing of nothing." These words had been underlined with the blue pencil, and they worked on Mrs. Hopewell like some kind of evil incantation in gibberish. She shut the book quickly and went out of the room as if she were having a chill. This morning when the girl came in, Mrs. Freeman was on Cara May. "She thrown up 4 times after supper," she said, "and it was twict at night after 3 o'clock. Yesterday she didn't do nothing but ramble in the bureau drawer. All she did, stand up there and see what she could run up on." "She's got to eat," Mrs. Hopewell muttered, sipping her coffee while she watched Joyce back at the stove. She was wondering what the child had said to the Bible salesman. She could not imagine what kind of conversation she could have possibly had with him. He was a tall, gaunt, hatless youth who had called them yesterday to sell them a Bible. He had appeared at the door carrying a large black suitcase that weighted him so heavily on one side he had to brace himself at the door facing. He seemed on the point of collapse, but he said in a cheerful voice, "Good morning, Mrs. Cedars," and set the suitcase down on the mat. He wasn't a bad-looking young man, though he had on a bright blue suit and yellow socks that were not pulled up far enough. He had prominent face bones and a streak of sticky-looking brown hair falling across his forehead. "I'm Mrs. Hopewell," she said. "Oh!" he said, pretending to look puzzled, but with his eyes just sparkling. "I saw it said the Cedars on the mailbox, so I thought that was you, Mrs. Cedars." And he burst out in a pleasant laugh. He picked up the satchel under cover of her pant, and he fell forward into her hall. It was rather as if the suitcase had moved first, jerking him after it. "Mrs. Hopewell," he said, and then grabbed her hand. "I hope you are well." And he laughed again, and then his face all at once sobered completely. He paused and gave her a straight, earnest look and said, "Lady, I've come to speak of serious things." "Well, come on in," she muttered, none too pleased because her dinner was almost ready. He came into the parlor and sat down on the edge of a straight chair and put the suitcase down between his feet and glanced around the room as if he were sizing her up by it. Her silver gleamed on the 2 sideboards. She decided that he had never been into a room so elegant as this. "Mrs. Hopewell," he began, using her name in a way that sounded almost intimate. "I know you believe in the Christian service." "Well, yes," she murmured. "I know," he said, and paused, looking very wise with his head cocked on one side. "I know that you're a good woman. Friends have told me." Mrs. Hopewell never liked to be taken for a fool. "What you selling?" she asked. "Bibles." the young man said, and his eye raced around the room before he added, "I see you have no family Bible in your parlor. I see that's the one lack you got." Mrs. Hopewell could not say, "My daughter's an atheist and won't let me keep a Bible in the parlor." She said, stiffening slightly, "I keep my Bible by my bedside." This was not the truth. It was in the attic somewhere. "Lady," he said, "the Word of God ought to be in the parlor." "Well, I think it's a matter of taste," she began. "I think, lady," he said, "for a Christian, the Word of God ought to be in every room in the house in his heart. I know you're a Christian because I can see it in every line of your face." She stood up and said, "Well, young man, I don't want to buy a Bible, and I smell my dinner burning." He didn't get up. He began to twist his hands, and looking down at them, he said softly, "Well, lady, I'll tell you the truth. Not many people want to buy one nowadays, and besides, I know I'm real simple. I don't know how to say a thing but to say it. I'm just a country boy." He glanced up into her unfriendly face. "People like you don't like to fool with country people like me." "Why?" she cried. "Good country people are the salt of the earth. Besides, we all have different ways of doing. It takes all kinds to make the world go round. That's life." "You said a mouthful," he said. "Why, I think there aren't enough good country people in the world," she said, stirred. "I think that's what's wrong with it." His face had brightened. "Well, I didn't introduce myself. He said, "I'm Manly Pointer from out the country around Willahobie. Not even from a place, just from near a place." "You wait a minute," she said. "I've got to see about my dinner." She went out to the kitchen and found Joy standing near the door where she had been listening. "Get rid of salt of the earth and let's eat," she said. Mrs. Hopewell gave her a pained look and turned the heat down under the vegetables. "I can't be rude to anybody," she murmured and went back into the parlor. He had opened a suitcase and was sitting with a Bible on each knee. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "You don't see any more real honest people till you go way out in the country." "I know," she said. "Real genuine folks." Through the crack in the door, she heard a groan. "I guess a lot of boys come telling you they're working their way through college," he said. "But I ain't gonna tell you that, somehow," he said. "I don't want to go to college. I want to devote my life to Christian service. See," he said, lowering his voice, "I got this heart condition. I may not live long, and when you know it's something wrong with you, and you may not live long, well then, lady." He paused, his mouth wide open, and stared at her. He and Joy had the same condition. She knew that her eyes were filling with tears, but she collected herself and quickly murmured, "Won't you stay for dinner? We'd love to have you." And she was sorry the instant she heard herself say it. "Yes, ma'am," he said in an abashed voice. "I'd sure love to do that." Joy had given him one look on being introduced to him, and then throughout the meal she had not glanced at him again. He addressed several remarks to her, which she had pretended not to hear. Mrs. Hopewell could understand deliberate rudeness, but she couldn't understand the way that Joy was doing it, even though she lived with it. And she always felt she had to overflow hospitality to make up for Joy's lack of courtesy. She urged him to talk about himself, and he did. He said he was the 7th child of 12 and that his father had been crushed under a tree when he himself was only 8 years old. He had been crushed very badly, in fact, almost cut in two, and was practically not recognizable. His mother had got along the best she could by hard working, and she had always seen that her children went to Sunday school and they read the Bible every evening. And he was now 19 years old and been selling Bibles for 4 months. In that time, he had sold 27 Bibles with the promise of 2 more sales. He wanted to become a missionary because he thought that was the way you could do the most for people. "He who loses his life shall find it," he said simply, and he was so sincere. He was so genuine and earnest that Mrs. Hopewell would not for the world have smiled. He prevented his peas from sliding on the table by blocking them with a piece of bread, which he later cleaned his plate with. She could see how Joy was observing sideways the way he handled his knife and fork, and she saw, too, that every few minutes the boy would dart a keen, appraising glance at the girl as if he were trying to attract her attention. After dinner, Joy cleared the dishes off the table and had disappeared, and Mrs. Hopewell was left to talk with him. He told her again about his childhood and his father's accident, and about various things that had happened to him. Every 5 minutes or so, she'd stifle a yawn. He sat for 2 hours until finally she told him she must go because she had an appointment in town. He packed his Bibles and thanked her and prepared to leave, but in the doorway he stopped and wrung her hand and said that not on any of his trips had he met a lady as nice as her, and he asked if he could come again. She said she would always be happy to see him. Joy had been standing in the road. Apparently, she was looking at something in the distance when he came down the steps toward her, bent to the side with his heavy valise. He stopped where she was standing and confronted her directly. Mrs. Hopewell could not hear what he said, but she trembled to think what Joy would say to him. She could see that after a minute, Joy said something and that the boy began to speak again, making an excited gesture with his free hand. And after a minute, Joy said something else, at which the boy began to speak once more. And then, to her amazement, Mrs. Hopewell saw the two of them walk off together toward the gate. Joy had walked all the way to the gate with him, and Mrs. Hopewell could not imagine what they had said to her, and yet she dared not ask. Mrs. Freeman was insisting upon her attention. She had moved from the refrigerator to the heater so that Mrs. Hopewell had to turn and face her in order to seem to be listening. "Glyne's gone out with Harvey Hill again last night. She had this sty." "Hill?" Mrs. Hopewell said absently. "Isn't that the one who works in the garage?" "No, he goes to the chiropractor school," Mrs. Freeman said. "And she had this sty. Ben had it 2 days. So she says when he brought her in the other night, he says, 'Let me get rid of that sty for you.' And she says, 'How?'
And he says, "You just lay yourself down across that car and I'll show you." So she done it, and he popped her neck, kept it several times till she made him quit this morning.
Mrs. Freeman said,
"She ain't got no sty no more. She ain't got no traces of a sty."
Never heard of that one before, Mrs. Hopewell said.
"He asked her to marry him before the ordinary,"
Mrs. Freeman went on.
"and she told him she wasn't going to get married in no office."
"Well, Glennice is a fine girl," Mrs. Hopewell said. "Glennice and Cara May, both fine girls."
Cara May said when her and Lyman was married, Lyman said it sure felt sacred to him. She said he wouldn't take $500 for being married by a preacher.
How much would he take?" the girl asked from the stove.
"He said he wouldn't take $500.
Mrs. Freeman repeated. "Well, we all have work to do," Mrs. Hopewell said.
Lyman said it just felt more sacred to him,
Mrs. Freeman said.
"The doctor wants Cara May to eat prunes. Says instead of medicine, says them cramps is coming from pressure. You know where I think it is?"
"She'll be better in a few weeks," Mrs. Hopewell said.
"It's in the tube,"
Mrs. Freeman said.
"Else she wouldn't be as sick as she is."
Holga had cracked her 2 eggs into a saucer and was bringing them to the table along with a cup of coffee that she had filled too full. She sat down carefully and began to eat, meaning to keep Mrs. Freeman there by questions if for any reason she showed any inclination to leave. She could perceive her mother's eye on her. The first roundabout question would be about the Bible salesman, and she did not wish to bring it on.
"How'd he pop her neck?"
she asked. Mrs. Freeman went into a description about how he popped her neck. She said he owned a 55 Mercury, but that Glennice said she'd rather marry a man with only a 36 Plymouth who would get married by a preacher. The girl asked, what if he had a 32 Plymouth? And Mrs. Freeman said what Glennice had said was a 36 Plymouth. Mrs. Hopewell said there were not many girls with Glennice's common sense. She said what she admired in those girls was their common sense. She said that reminded her that they had a nice visitor yesterday, a young man selling Bibles. "Oh, Lord," she said. "He bored me to death, but he was so sincere and so genuine. I couldn't be rude to him. It was good country people, you know," she said. "Just salt of the earth."
"Oh, I seen him walk up,"
Mrs. Freeman said.
"and then later I seen him walk off."
And Hulga could feel the slight shift in her voice, the slight insinuation that he had not walked off alone, had he? Her face remained expressionless, but the color rose into her neck, and she seemed to swallow it down with the next spoonful of egg. Mrs. Freeman was looking at her as if they had a secret together. "Well, it takes all kind of people to make the world go round," Mrs. Hopewell said. "And it's very good we're not all alike."
"Some people is more alike than others,"
Mrs. Freeman said. Hulga got up and stumped, with about twice the noise that was necessary, into her room and locked the door. She was to meet the Bible salesman at 10 o'clock at the gate. She had thought about it half the night. She had started thinking of it as a great joke, and then she began to see the profound implications in it. She had lain in bed imagining dialogues for them that were insane on the surface, but that reached below the depths that no Bible salesman would be aware of. Their conversation yesterday had been of this kind. He had stopped in front of her, and he had simply stood there. His face was bony and sweaty and bright, with a little pointed nose in the center of it, and his look was different from what it had been at the dinner table. He was gazing at her with open curiosity, with fascination, like a child watching a new fantastic animal at the zoo. He was breathing as if he'd run a great distance to see her. His gaze seemed somehow familiar, but she could not think of where she had been regarded with it before. For almost a minute he didn't say nothing, and then, on what seemed to be an insuck of breath, he whispered, "You ever eat chicken that was 2 days old?" The girl looked at him stonily. He might have just put this question up for consideration at the meeting of a philosophical association. "Yes," she presently replied, as if she had considered it from all angles. "It must have been mighty small," he said triumphantly, and shook all over with nervous little giggles, getting very red in the face, and subsiding finally into his gaze of complete admiration, while the girl's expression remained exactly the same. "How old are you?" he asked softly. She waited some time before she answered, and then in a flat voice she said, 17. His smiles came in succession like waves breaking on the surface of a little lake. "I see you got a wooden leg," he said. "I think you're real brave. I think you're real sweet." The girl stood blank, solid, silent. "Walk to the gate with me. You're a brave, sweet little thing, and I liked you the minute I seen you walk in the door." Olga began to move a little forward. "What's your name?" he asked, smiling down the top of her head. "Olga," she said. "Olga," he murmured. "Olga. Olga. I ain't never heard of nobody named Olga before. You shy, ain't you, Olga?" She nodded, watching his large red hand on the handle of the giant valise. "I like girls that wears glasses," he said. "I think a lot. I'm not like these people that's never seen a serious thought cross their head. It's because I may die." "I may die too," she said suddenly, and looked at him. His eyes were very small and brown, glittering feverishly. "Listen," he said, you don't think some people was meant to meet on account of what all they got in common, right? Like, they both think serious thoughts and all." He shifted the valise to his other hand so that the hand nearest her was free. He got hold of her elbow and shook it a little. "I don't work on Saturday," he said. "I like to walk in the woods, and I like to see what Mother Nature is wearing. Over the hills and far away, picnics and things. Couldn't we go to a picnic tomorrow? Please say yes, Olga." Oh, and he said that and gave her a dying look, as if he felt the insides about to drop on out of him. He had even seemed to sway slightly toward her. During the night, she imagined that she seduced him. She imagined that the two of them walked on the place until they came to the storage barn beyond the two back fields, and there she imagined that things came to pass, that she very easily seduced him, and then, of course, she had to reckon with his remorse. True genius can get an idea across even to an inferior mind. She imagined that she took his remorse in hand and changed it to a deeper understanding of life. She took all his shame and turned it into something useful. She set off for the gate at exactly 10 o'clock, escaping without drawing Mrs. Hopewell's attention. She didn't take anything to eat, forgetting that food is usually taken on a picnic. She wore a pair of slacks and a dirty white shirt, and as an afterthought, she put on some Vapex on the collar, since she didn't own any perfume. When she reached the gate, no one was there. She looked up and down the empty highway and had the furious feeling that she'd been tricked, that he only meant to make her walk to the gate after the idea of him. Then suddenly he stood up very tall from behind a bush on the opposite side of the embankment. Smiling, he lifted his hat, which was now new and wide-brimmed. He had not worn it yesterday, and she wondered if he had bought it for the occasion. It was toast-colored with a red and white band around it and was slightly too large for him. He stepped from behind the bush carrying still that black valise. He had on the same suit and the same yellow socks, sucked down into his shoes from walking. He crossed the highway and said, "I knew you'd come." The girl wondered acidly how he had known this. She pointed to the valise and said, "Why are you bringing your Bibles?" He took her elbow, smiling down on her as if he could not stop. "You can never tell when you're going to need the word of God, Holga," he said. And she had a moment in which she doubted this was actually happening. Then they began to climb the embankment. They went down to the pasture towards the woods, and the boy walked lightly by her side, bouncing on his toes. The valise did not seem to be too heavy today, and he even swung it. They crossed half the pasture without saying anything, and then, putting his hand easily on the small of her back, he asked softly, "What is your wooden leg jolting on?" She turned in ugly red and glared at him for an instant, and the boy looked abashed. I ain't mean you no harm," he said. "I only meant you so brave and all. I guess God takes care of you." "No," she said, looking forward and walking fast. "I don't even believe in God." And at this, he stopped and whistled. "No!" He exclaimed it as if he were too astonished to say anything else. She walked on, and in a second he was bouncing at her side, fanning with his hat. "That's very unusual of a girl," he remarked, watching her out the corner of his eye. When they reached the edge of the wood, he put his hand on her back again and drew her against him without a word and kissed her heavily. The kiss, which had more pressure than feeling behind it, produced that extra surge of adrenaline in the girl that enables one to carry a packed trunk out of a burning house. But in her, the power went at once to her brain. Even before he released her, her mind, clear and detached and ironic anyway, was regarding him from such a great distance with amusement, but also with pity. She had never been kissed before, and she was pleased to discover that it was an unexceptional experience and all a matter of the mind's control. Some people might enjoy drain water if they were sold it was vodka. When the boy, looking expectant but uncertain, pushed her gently away, she turned and walked on, saying nothing else, as if such business for her were common enough. He came along, panting at her side, trying to help her when he saw a root that she might trip over. He caught and held back the long, swaying blades of the thorn vine until she had passed beyond them. She led the way, and he came breathing heavily after. Then they came out on a sunlit hillside, sloping softly into another one that was a little smaller. Beyond, they could see the rusted top of the old barn where the extra hay was stored. The hill was sprinkled with small pink weeds. "Then you ain't saved?" he asked suddenly, stopping. The girl smiled. It was the first time she'd smiled at him at all. "In my economy," she said. "I'm saved and you are damned, but I told you I didn't believe in God." Nothing seemed to destroy the boy's look of admiration. He gazed at her now as if the fantastic animal at the zoo had put its paws through the bars and had given him a loving poke. She thought he looked as if he wanted to kiss her again, and she walked on before he had the chance. "Ain't there somewheres we can sit down sometime?" he murmured, his voice softening toward the end of the sentence. "In that barn," she said. They made for it rapidly, as if it might slide away like a train. It was a large 2-story barn, cook and dark inside. The boy pointed up the ladder that led to the loft and said, "It's too bad we can't go up there." "Well, why can't we?" she asked. "Your leg," he said reverently. The girl gave him a contemptuous look, and putting both hands on the ladder, she climbed it while he stood below, apparently awestruck. She pulled herself expertly through the opening and looked down at him and said, "Well, come on if you're coming." And he began to climb the ladder, awkwardly bringing the suitcase with him. "We won't need the Bible," she observed. "You can never tell," he said, panting. After he'd gotten to the loft, he was a few seconds catching his breath. She had sat down in a pile of straw, a wide sheath of sunlight filled with dust particles slanted over her. She lay back against a bale, her face turned away, looking out the front opening of the barn where hay was thrown from a wagon into the loft. The 2 pink speckled hillsides lay back against a dark ridge of woods. The sky, cloudless, cold blue. The boy had dropped down by her side and put one arm under her and the other over her. And he began methodically kissing her face, making little noises like a fish. He did not remove his hat, but it was pushed far enough back not to interfere. When her glasses got in his way, he took them off and he slipped them into his pocket. The girl at first did not return any of the kisses, but presently she began to, and after she had put several on his cheek, She reached his lips and remained there, kissing him again and again as if she were trying to draw all the breath out of him. His breath was clear and sweet like a child's, and the kisses were sticky like a child. He mumbled about loving her and about how knowing he first seen her that he loved her, but the mumbling was like the sleepy fretting of a child put to sleep by his mother. Her mind throughout this never stopped or lost itself for a second to her feelings.
"You ain't said you love me none," he whispered, finally pulling back from her. "You gotta say that."
She looked away from him, into the hollow sky, then down at the black ridge, then down farther into what appeared to be two green swelling lakes. She didn't realize he had taken her glasses, but this landscape could not seem exceptional to her, for she seldom paid any close attention to her surroundings.
"You gotta say it," he repeated. "You gotta say you love me."
She was always careful how she committed herself. "In a sense," she began.
"If you use the word loosely, you might say that. But it's not a word I use. I don't have illusions. I'm one of those people who can see through to nothing."
The boy was frowning.
"You gotta say it. I said it, and you gotta say it,"
he said. The girl looked at him almost tenderly.
"You poor baby," she murmured. "It's just as well you don't understand."
And she pulled him by the neck, face down against her.
"We are all damned," she said. "But some of us have taken off our blindfolds and see that there is nothing to see. It's a kind of salvation."
The boy's astonished eyes looked blankly through the ends of her hair. "Okay," he almost whined. "But do you love me or don't you?"
"Yes," she said, and added, "In a sense, but I must tell you something. There mustn't be anything dishonest between us."
She lifted his head and looked him in the eye.
"I am 30 years old," she said. "I have a number of degrees."
The boy's look was irritated but dogged. "I don't care," he said.
"I don't care a thing about what all you done. I just want to know if you love me or don't you."
And he caught her to him and wildly planted her face with kisses until she said, "Yes, yes." "Okay, then," he said, letting her go. "Prove it." She smiled, looking dreamily out of a shifty landscape. She had seduced him without even making her mind up to try. "How?" she asked, feeling that he should be delayed a little. He leaned over and put his lips to her ear.
"Show me where your wooden leg joins."
The girl uttered a sharp little cry, and her face instantly drained of color. The obscenity of the suggestion was not what shocked her. As a child, she had sometimes been subject to feelings of shame, but education had removed the last traces of what was how a good surgeon scrapes for cancer. She wouldn't have no more felt it over what he was asking than she would have believed in his Bible. But she was as sensitive about the artificial leg as a peacock about his tail. No one ever touched it but her. She took care of it as someone else would his soul. In private,
and almost with her own eyes turned away. "No," she said. "I known it," he muttered, sitting up. "You're just playing me for a sucker." "Oh, no," she cried. "It joins at the knee, only at the knee. Why? Why do you want to see it?" The boy gave her a long, penetrating look. "Because," he said, "it's what makes you different. You ain't like anybody else." She sat staring at him. There was nothing about her face or her round, freezing blue eyes to indicate that this had moved her, but she felt as if her heart had stopped and left her mind to pump her blood. She decided that for the first time in her life, she was face to face with real innocence. This boy, with an instinct that came from beyond wisdom, had touched the truth about her. When after a minute she said in a hoarse, high voice, "All right," it was like she was surrendering to him completely. It was like losing her own life and then finding it again, miraculously, in his. Very gently, he began to roll the slack leg up. The artificial limb in a white sock and brown flat shoe was bound in a heavy material like canvas and ended in an ugly jointure where it was attached to the stump. The boy and his voice were entirely reverent as he uncovered it and said, "Now, show me how to take it on and put it on, take it off and put it on again." She took it off for him. She put it back on again, and then he took it off himself, handling it as tenderly as if it was a real one. "See?" he said with a delighted child's face. "Now I can do it myself." "Put it back on," she said. She was thinking that she would run away with him, and that every night he would take the leg off and every morning put it back on again. "Put it back on," she said. "Not yet," he murmured, setting on his foot outside of her reach. "Leave it off for a while. You got me instead." She gave a little cry of alarm, but he pushed her down and began to kiss her again. Without the leg, she felt entirely dependent on him. Her brain seemed to have stopped thinking altogether and to be about some other function that it was not very good at. Different expressions raced back and forth over her face. Every now and then, the boy, his eyes like two steel spikes, would glance behind him where the leg stood. Finally, she pushed him off and said, "Put it back on me now." "Wait," he said. He leaned the other way and pulled the valise toward him and opened it. It had a pale blue spotted lining, and there were only 2 Bibles in it. He took one of these out and opened the cover of it. It was hollow. It contained a pocket flask of whiskey, a pack of cards, a small blue box with printing on it. He laid these out in front of her one at a time in an evenly spaced row, like one presenting offerings at the shrine of a goddess. He put the blue box in her hand. "This product to be used only for the prevention of disease." She read it and dropped it. The boy was unscrewing the top of the flask. He stopped and pointed with a smile to the deck of cards. It was not an ordinary deck, but one with an obscene picture on the back of each card. "Take a swig," he said, offering her the bottle first. He held it in front of her, but like one mesmerized, she did not move. Her voice, when she spoke, had an almost pleading sound. "Aren't you," she murmured, "aren't you just good country people?" The boy cocked his head.
He looked as if he were just beginning to understand that she might be trying to insult him. "Yeah?" he said, curling his lips slightly. "But it ain't held me back none. I'm as good as you any day of the week. Give me my leg," she said. He pushed it further away with his foot. "Come on now, let's have us a good time," he said coaxingly. "We ain't got to know one another good yet." "Give me my leg!" she screamed and tried to lunge for it, but he pushed her down easily. "What's the matter with you all of a sudden?" he asked, frowning as he screwed the top of the flask and put quickly back inside the Bible. "You, just a while ago, said you don't believe in nothing. I thought you was some girl." Her face was almost perfect. "You're a Christian," she hissed. "You're a Christian just like them all. You say one thing and do another. You're a perfect Christian. The boy's mouth was set angrily. "I hope you don't think," he said in a lofty and indignant tone, "that I believe in any of that crap. I may sell Bibles, but I know which end is up. And I wasn't born yesterday, and I know where I'm going." "Give me my leg!" she screeched. He jumped so quickly that she barely saw him sweep the cards in the blue box back in the Bible and throw that Bible back in the valise. She saw him grab the leg, and then she saw it for an instant slanted forlornly across the inside of the suitcase with the Bible at either of its opposite ends. He slammed the lid shut, snatched up the valise and swung it down the hole, then stepped through the hole himself. When all of him had passed but his head, he turned, and he regarded her with a look that no longer had any admiration. "I got a lot of interesting things," he said. "One time I got a woman's glass eye this way, and you needn't think that you'll catch me because Pointer ain't my name. I use a different name at every house, and I call and I don't stay nowheres long. And I'll tell you another thing, Hulga," he said, using her name as if he didn't think much of it. "You ain't so smart. I've been believing in nothing ever since I was born." And then the toast-colored hat disappeared down the hole, and the girl was left sitting in straw in the dusty sunlight. When she turned her churning face toward the opening, she saw his blue figure struggling successfully over the green speckled lake. Mrs. Hopewell and Mrs. Freeman, who were back at the pasture, digging up onions, saw him emerge a little later. They saw him emerge from the woods and head across the meadow toward the highway. "Why, that looks like that nice dull man who tried to sell me a Bible yesterday," Mrs. Hopewell said, squinting. "He must have been selling them to them Negroes in the back there. He was so simple," she said, "but I guess the world would be better off if we were all that simple." Mrs. Freeman's gaze drove forward and just touched him before he disappeared under the hill. Then she turned her attention to the evil-smelling onion she was lifting from the ground. "Some can't be that simple," she said. "I know I never could."
Nah, Flannery, you can't be doing that to people. You can't be writing stuff like that, Flannery. That was too disturbing. I'm out. I can't deal with it. But here's what we're gonna do. we're coming out with some analysis soon. We want to get into the thoughts on this. We want to get into how it's relevant. So drop your comments, drop your thoughts below if you want to be included in that. And you can subscribe, like the video so you can be notified when it comes out. It should pop up on this screen here too whenever it comes out. But if you subscribe and hit that bell icon, you'll get notified. Anyway, thank you for hanging with me during this horrific experience, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.